Setting up my timer. Check, check. Is it working? Um, Check. Am I audible? Okay, okay. Has it started? Alright, so, well, thank you everyone. Before I start my speech, shout out to Hanto and Angga and all other LDT1 debaters. Well, alright, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think that in the modern society, when things has become too complex, that more and more things become important aspects of your life, that makes life become more diverse, that makes you have more interest, and etc., such as your job, your wage, your connection, your identity, or whatever, right? We think that divorce is just likely in this kind of era, and we think that it has been a trend in the status quo when you see many child are abandoned and how many people are divorced, right? So what is the definition of premarital agreement? We think that it is as simple as an agreement between both parties before they are engaged in a marriage, which was not exclusive and everyone knows it, and it applies for everyone no matter how they are. On account of model, we think that it will be as simple as 4 steps. First, we think that government will enforce this kind of rule through the government agents, through the ministries that we will appoint to control marriage. But second, we think that there will be a discussion among 2 parties that is engaging. That is to say, we government will provide them with help from law experts, from law advisors that will let them know what are their rights during or after marriage, right? We think that on account of this, government must add additional rules to make it clearer. For example, on the basis that we must put a minimum amount of child support, a minimum amount of support, or etc. Government will make everything clear. But thirdly, we think that these informations about you before the marriage will be revealed to everyone, your partner, like in form of your debt, your money, and etc. And four, we think that this contract will be signed during your marriage and will be lawful and will be applied when divorce happens. So what we think the result will be? We think first, on our world, divorce will happen much more easily and all the clauses in the prenup will be executed well. So why we think this is needed? First, we think that it protects both parties when divorce happens. That is to say, you see the current status quo and knows that how divorce harms other party when it happens. For example, in form of your debt that is somehow attributed to you during the divorce or other things that is interconnected to you because you engage with someone. Why we think that it is important? Because most likely this kind of thing is not your fault. That is to say, it already exists before your marriage. We think that your partner's condition before marriage is not your responsibility, right? So we think that with our mechanism, we will protect you from every kind of possible harm when this kind of rule doesn't exist. But second, we think that on our side, it makes divorce much more easier. Hence, it's easier for you to break toxic relationship. Toxic relationship that looks like an unhealthy relation, a relation that makes you feel sad every day, or etc. But we have the burden to prove to you why in the current status quo it's just harder, right? Know that the fact that first, in the current status quo, many people are afraid to get married because you're afraid that you might get harmed or you're not benefited during the divorce. Like on some cases, you agreed to a marriage because some promises from your counterpart, right? Which in the current status quo, there is no law that is binding such a thing. But with our agreement, this thing will be included. But second, we think that when you are in a vulnerable position in the marriage, to say, for example, you are a woman who from the low class marrying a man that is happening to be having a higher socio-economic standings from you, right? If you are this kind of person and you enter such toxic marriage, we think that most likely will happen is whenever your partner do every mistakes, you will just forgive him and keep trying to hold on this toxic relationship because you know if you get into divorce, you will be harmed, right? We think that, yeah, sure.
Don't you think that the nature of policy is going to be a one-size-fits-all? It's going to be very rigid, so the premarital agreement is going to be unideal, given the dynamic of the relationship.
We think that when the government had already revealed every information about you in our mechanism, we think that it's already enough for you to know about your partner, right? So we think that even if at the end of the day divorce happens, even if you say it's rigid, we think that it's still acceptable because both of you have accepted it. So why we think it is just better? Because in our world, you are not afraid to get divorced anymore. That's to say, you don't really need to think of your future when you're in the vulnerable position and you're afraid that you won't get benefit, right? In our world, when prenuptial agreement exists, most likely your future is secured to mandatory support for you or any other ways. But third, we think that our most beneficial benefit is the clearer future for your children. That is to say, with prenuptial agreement, we also discuss about child support, right? We think that parents should take care of these children and provide for them, and it's all already written in the support, right? We think that on our agreement, both parties will talk about who will, at the end of the day, take care of their child. We think that it's just better from current status quo condition, as on the current status quo, it's just not clear, right? Maybe you will say that you are maybe you will say that children is better with the mother or maybe the father and etc. We think that this kind of dynamics is also a problem, considering the fact that this kind of parents can just prove that they are being naive, they're not mature or etc. We think that with our prenuptial agreement, we throw the responsibility to the person from the beginning. So what we think is a much more better thing on our side, because at least notice that on the current status quo, how children are abandoned by their parents. Notice that how many children don't live with them and they only live with their grandparents because these parents claim naivety. They claim that they are not prepared for marriage in the beginning, etc. We think that this kind of agreement just makes everything clear and there will be no such a claim from the parents, right? So let's say the opposition will bring a best case scenario and say that on our side, divorce is much more likely to happen. We think that it's not, because one, we think that a marriage will stand if it's a happy one. That's to say, if you are happy and the marriage is okay, divorce is not likely. Even if there is prenuptial agreement that makes divorce easier, we think that it only happens on cases you are not happy, right? Which we think that even if the opposition might say that it's bad for your children because marriage is easier, we think that it is okay because we think that even if you hold on the marriage, but if it's toxic or etc., children will be harmed in the end when they got the emotional damage seeing his father abuse his mother or etc. We think that on our side, it's just better. But second, we think that even if divorce happens on our side, we think that it is just better because at least you escapes from these toxic things. What the opposition needs to prove to you is, first, we think that they need to prove why at the end of the day marriage should never end, considering the fact that this proposal makes divorce much more easier. But second, they need to prove to you why at the end of the day this is just a harmful thing, considering the fact that this case only mitigates the worst case scenario of marriage. And that's why we're proud to propose.
Check, am I audible? Okay. Wait. Okay. First of all, there's no preferred gender pronouns. You can refer me as LO. And then to POI, just raise your hand. Please don't badger me for that. But yeah. Okay. Before I got into this, for a person who at the very least has experienced like more than 3 divorces, I would be very embarrassed if I figure this wrong. So like, yeah, okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A criminal will know how to lead their way out with an instructed and certain limits that they know what they would get after they lead their way out or perform a certain criminal actions. So all gonna came into this debate considering status quos and OG's concern and why this mandatory action is gonna incentivize it. All agree with status quo's concern about how toxic marriage happen, no support afterwards it, and abuses happen. But we are going to provide in two parts of my speech is why, one, why then it will be worse in your side of the house, and second, why it will be better in our side of the house. In our side, what we wanted is for people to choose whether or not they wanted to provide premarital agreement, and it is not mandatory. And second, we could just allocate resources that they directed into the premarital agreement towards more surveillance regarding the resources and the humans also, for providing more protection and policy on abuses and marital matters and all. Therefore, the concern will be uncertain outside the house. Let's talk about OG world and why and where it existed. Judge, do notice that the most important that you should take into account in marriage is one, love. Second is a family. What could build a family? This is not only talking about the parents. We are also taking into account the kids that existed in that family and what would happen after this agreement is existed. Here's why. First thing, we will talk about how opening government haven't really considered the idea of how the process of premarital agreements how would happen. We could take into account certain things. First thing, the process would be, since this is a mandatory thing where you know that you are going, forced to do this and you need to do this at the end of the day, so there is no leeway out for this for you, right? If we are considering the abuses or like abusive partner that would marry you, then because they know that at the end of the day they will still need to do the agreement, they can just lead their way out by providing one. You could just gaslight your partner to actually just give more things to you after marriage. Like you could just say like things like, "Are you not loving me anymore?" or such or such. It means that process on the premarital agreements would not achieve the actual cause if they didn't really take into account what could be happening in the process, like gaslighting or others. But second thing, this is gonna happen when it's mandatory because one, you are forced, and then you are more prone to gaslighting because these people are not acknowledging there will be no escape at the end of the day. But second, the choice and the content of the premarital agreement, we are going to say, no, thank you, how OG hasn't really taken into account one thing. Even though they say that even before marital, you already acknowledge who your partner was, who he is, and such things like that, we could say that this is failed by the illusion of love. You consider that how a lot of marriages are failing because even though they realize that they already acknowledge their partner, at the end of the day they realize that they didn't really know that much about them. So even though you provided a premarital agreement, this is still not going to achieve your cause, because at the end of the day you still don't know who this person is, you don't know what could they do, and such and such. But at the second thing, you are not totally consenting to this. Judge, notice that when you are about to get into marriage, you are totally in love with this person, or you know that what their capability was. It means that your judgment is clouded. Therefore, you could just like provide so many things for them. Like you could just give more than what you can take at the end of the day, because you still love them and you would not never imagine that it will leave you at the end of the day. Added by the gaslighting, this equals you not getting enough benefit at the end of the day. So therefore, their judgment upon getting the premarital agreement is still clouded. But that's assuming, no thank you, that's assuming the impact of prenup during the process. But let's move on to another addition. First thing, we are, as I've talked before in my opening, when you are giving certain things, instructions, guidelines, limitation to a criminal, they would know what they will lose and they will gain after this. That means what? It leads into more choices of criminality, in the sense you know what you are getting into. If God's concern is going to be more abuses, more divorce, more child protection, it means that this is more likely because one, they know the limit to not get the penalty. There is a detailed premarital agreement that would fit maybe they would agree on, and it means that you know the limit for you to not get into that penalty at the end of the day. It means more incentivizing for you to actually acknowledge what you are getting into. But second, it incentivizes you because you know what you would lose and you would wait out. If after you got what you wanted and you can just go and it will not cost you too much than the benefits, then it's okay. For example, you could just marry a wealthy woman or man and then climb up into the social hierarchy because they are pretty knowledgeable or others and others respect them, and after that you could just leave them because you decided that this social hierarchy still would be more sustainable than than just marrying someone who I didn't love. Or second, the money, how you maybe ask them for invest in certain things that business offer you, and then afterwards when you decided that this is sustainable, you could just leave out because you decided that the downs that you will get doesn't weigh out the benefit that you get from them. So it incentivizes them to actually know the limit and the guidelines for them. But second, OG ideas about how they know their partners is incorrect, as I've said before. No, thank you. And also, you will really need to take into account another actors of this motion, which is the child and the family. We acknowledge that when the child would know that the premarital agreement is existed. What does this mean? It means that you are giving them the picturization that you are really prone to making a divorce. You give them an insecurity of divorce. Your child will only know that you will actually, at the end of the day, will actually be able to divorce because you already get the agreement that you will be okay even if you are divorced. There is no such actual sense of dependency of economy for you to actually stay and all. And at the end of the day, your marriage is only a choice of economy because before you make that decision, you already know what you will get into. What happened inside of the house? One, when it is not mandatory, it is an option. One, there is less leeway for you to actually go. Because one, there is no certain guideline on what is good and bad, even though there is a policy at the end of the day. Because these people doesn't know the limit for them to get the penalty. So there is no actual metrics of for how they leeway their out, and no way to minimize your abuse and so. I mean, in the sense of you are gonna go just incentivize it because you know you don't know the certain limit of it. So there is more likelihood for it to actually be known for your abuses and such. But second, because it is non-mandatory, you could actually know the quality of your partner. How is this possible? Because when it is not mandatory, one, people are not going to make their leeway out of this policy. But second, when these people are getting their way out by saying that I don't want to do any premarital agreement because it is not mandatory at all, it means that you actually know the quality of your partner at the end of the day. Even if it's clouded by the judgment, it will happen at the end. And even if that's really urgent in the side of the house, we could see that people are already caring about how prenups are in the status quo because there are a lot of cases that open their eyes up. There are a lot of discussion for this. Therefore, we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Is it audible? Okay. Well, I'm so happy I can, throughout this round, shout out to Hanto and Angga that coaching me before. Well, my gender pronouns is he, him, or okay. Or you can just call me by my role as the Deputy of Prime Minister. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, I will talk two things here. First, respond to opening opposition, and the second is my argument. My response to opening opposition is, first, they say prenup won't achieve safety because you go into marriage because you love them and you don't really know your partner. Why? Because it's, first, this is the no clear analysis why this is true. And the second is, love and uncertainty is a risk that every marriage has.
But on our side, the risk is lower because the rules are clear. And the second response is, on opposition side, it's much more harmful because you don't have a contract that can materialize benefit for you on case of divorce. For example, like Jeff Bezos losing his money to his ex-wife from divorce. This thing won't happen on our side because prenup can secure his wealth on divorce. And back to my arguments, why premarital agreements should be as mandatory in the current status quo. First, to make the couple more responsible when they are getting married. What does this mean? Premarital agreements should be as mandatory to make the couple more responsible. Why? Simple. Because marriage is not similar like other relationships. For example, like having a boyfriend or having a girlfriend. Marriage is something that should do just one time for a lifetime. Why? Because if you want to get married, you should know your partner either in outside or in inside. So marriage itself, it's something that you should have agreements before. If you don't want to have the premarital agreements, just don't get married. Why? Because like I said before, marriage is not something that is simple. And the second is, the benefit of premarital agreement itself, it's already enough to a couple who are want to get in marriage. What does this mean? For example, like the couple who are getting married, they went to divorce because of they feel like they don't fit each other. By having a premarital agreements they cannot do that because in a premarital agreements they are agreed that they cannot divorcing each other. And why this is exclusive? Because they feel like they fit into each other. Because in the current status quo, many of couples wants to getting married. They feel like they fit into each other, but the fact that they're not fit into each other. This is why many of couple divorce. By divorcing here, make other people think that why everyone that getting married at the end of the day, they are divorced, and they also think that getting married is worse. But the fact that you cannot just marry someone that when you still with he or she in the meantime, just because you think you and your partner is fit into each other. And this is the function of premarital agreements. If you want to get married, make sure that you and your partner is ready and have a premarital agreement. And also, for example, like in the current status quo, there are many of abandoned children. Why? Because the parents are divorced, and this is the harm of not make premarital agreements as a mandatory. Because if the parents doesn't have premarital agreements before, they think that they can do anything to their partners. They can have a toxic relationship. They can divorce each other, but they don't think about their children. They don't think about their mental health. This is also the function of the premarital agreements also. And okay, an API please from opposition. No thanks. I continue my arguments. If premarital agreements not as a mandatory here in the current status quo, the people think like, okay, like I can marry someone, I can marry anything, I can marry anyone, but they feel like they don't love each other, but they just they want to, he or she want to marry him or her, by maybe his financial, maybe his social status, it will happen in the current status quo if the premarital agreements not as a mandatory. Well, I think that's all about my speech. I'd like to propose. Thank you.
Audible? Yep. My preferred gender pronoun are he or him. If you do want to POI me, please just be in your seat. No need to stand up. Just basically raise your hand. And of course, please no badgering from all parties. Right. Oh yeah. Sorry. Let me number my speech first. Oh. No. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge do notice that none of their benefit is going to fly because several reasons. First, there is a process of gaslighting happening under their side of the house. I will explain this later on. But secondly, there is an easier way for you to manipulate your premarital agreement under their side of the house. Again, I will explain this later on. But thirdly, the judgment is going to be clouded under their side of the house because they are in the middle of falling in love and they're in the middle of basically preparing their marriage, which they have put so many time, effort, and love to right? But therefore, but going on to then some classes against the theme of the opening government, right? Okay, right. First is the classes of what kind of marriage you want to have, right? They say divorce happen more easily under their side of the house, and they say basically this is good to prevent abusive spouse or etc. Several responses from our side of the house. Firstly, notice how then all of this, which is making prenup mandatory, will mean you change the nature of marriage. Several things. Firstly, notice how making a marriage making a marriage and breaking up a marriage doesn't again be a decision based on love or no satisfaction at all, but will become the decision of how much profit do you get or how many do you lose, and this will make the divorce far more easily, which is true under their side of the house. But we believe that their main case about making divorce easily is not that strategic because of some reason. Firstly, notice how most divorce doesn't happen because of abuse, but happen because they are in the middle of anger, in the middle of basically the peak of their anger, that one spouse or another, and they threaten with the words let's break up atau kita cerai aja and other things to show that they have more power over another spouses in the marriage, and this will be answered like ya udah or terserah kamu, to show that the other spouse don't want to concede their power in the marriage. And then this will follow up with action like staying in different room. This will follow up with action like not talking and end up in pengadilan agama. And this is what make the easiness of breakup is dangerous under their side of the house, because they may not think rationally when they are angry, right? And maybe they will probably regret this later on. But follow-up action then would be very, very disastrous under their side of the house, because this means that because this means that they know that their spouse probably doesn't love them anymore and etc. Right? But right, and while under our side of the house, the confusion of harta gono gini will make partners to simply first, make up again and continue their marriage, or or second, basically think through their decision of wanting to separate, and basically, if they do want to separate, that it means that it's became that unbearable. But going on to the next things, right? But how do we answer their concern of abuse of basically having a spouse that abuse the many mechanisms that happen under status quo and under our world, right? Firstly, notice the government can provide KDRT help service under our side of the house, which is already bring with my first speaker, which would have helped the spouse that are being treated harshly to break up and claim most of the assets that they have in the first place, or maybe most of the assets in the marriage, right? But second, the bigger family can notice if the woman or man have bruises on their hand and etc. And they could notice if they basically have some sort of psychological.
The fact that when you are from the lower class and your spouse from the higher class makes their family looks low on you, we think that that kind of mechanism won't counter all toxic relationships, soft abuse, or etc.
Okay, even if all right, but then again, what I said happened. But there is another mechanism that that answer that, right? Have bruise and they can report them to the KDRT service. Even if the family doesn't report them, among other things, maybe these things like bruises and basically mood swings, or basically the spouses are likes to cry when they are working, are noticeable by work partners and etc. So so basically the work partners will probably tell the KDRT service, and their concern can be clearly answered under our side of the house with better mechanization coming from my explanation, right? But they said that the treatment of children is better under their side of the house about child support. This is all clearly wrong because of some reason. Firstly, the thing that affect the child the most is not material, right? But it's psychology. The effect of the parents' breakup will probably traumatize the children all of their life, and even affect their psychology on love and etc. So it's not best in the first place not to break up. If they say that, oh, it's okay because there's material and etc., we believe that from the monetary side, we believe that there is a bigger family to take care of the children first, and second, there is another actors like the state to basically help the children monetarily. Thirdly, or C, notice how it traumatized distance the child with the parents when you let them know that your parents could just break up each other and being okay with it, since you both knows that the penalty of it. But going on, right? To the classes of creating a marriage based on rationality, which side could basically create this marriage? Firstly, notice their cases is basically utopia. Notice how there is a story or a narrative, right? There's a strong narrative about love is blind, and you need to sacrifice yourself to love. And this can be seen on many movies, on many books, and etc. Like Titanic, where the boys sacrifice themselves and etc. What is the impact of this? Firstly, that not all people have the same mindset on making prenup on their own. This is provable that many couple doesn't make prenup in the first place, means that they believe or they buy into this narrative. Secondly, notice the condition of making a prenup when both parties are forced to make a prenup is not really logically thinking because of several reasons. Firstly, the fact that they are forced to means that they probably don't want to make a prenup in the first place. From the first place, this means that they have a concept of how they are inseparable, of they want to showing their love to their which means prenup is a method of showing how their love to their spouse by having unlogical prenup like sharing most of their wealth to their spouse, which will create massive damage upon breakup, to basically prove that I love you so much, I want to basically give all of my wealth and massive things to you, right? But B, notice how then this thing won't happen under our side of the house, because the separation of harta gono gini will not be illogical on our side of the house, because the feeling of love isn't present when they want to break up. This add with some fact that first, notice the state have apparatus to basically find out the income. Second, all information like bank transaction can be seen, which means that when upon breakup, this will probably create a more fair breakup and dividing of harta gono gini. We are very proud to oppose. Thank you. Whose pen is this? Check, check. All right. I'm assuming this is audible to the live stream. Ideally, taking a POI from opening for possible engagement, but if not, sure, I'll take one from closing as well. Prefer general pronouns or he, him, but yeah, just address me as a member of GOV. Before I start my speech, I know this motion might talk about a few sensitive topics about marriage, divorce, perhaps abuse inside that marriage. So yeah, I just want to issue a very quick trigger warning. This is strictly for the purposes of this debate, and yeah, not intended to offend any parties. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Two major contributions coming from CG. This is going to be round 1 because this capitulates on the main fundamental issue coming from opening benches. One, we're going to properly portray what the marriage dynamic actually looks like. I think opening government haven't really been engaging enough to opening opposition's characterization. We understand that the power imbalance, etc., is fundamentally, existing within marriage. We're going to flip OO's case and prove why that eventually translates to a need to mandate prenuptial agreements, and especially how that eventually translates to how prenups are going to be made. Secondly, we're actually going to characterize how mandating prenups actually protect people who suffer from that imbalanced power dynamic. This is very important coming from CG because this directly addresses the issue of the most vulnerable actor in the debate. Let's characterize first, right? Marriage. What does that look like? I think there is always an imbalanced power dynamic, something opening opposition kind of concede to, but here's the thing. What does that look like? One partner almost always makes more money. Why is that problematic? Because that means that when the breadwinner, when the finances is being controlled by one individual, I think it means that all of the finances in that family, all of the power, especially when marriage is so contingent on how important finances is, it means that it's contingent on that one person. Even if both married individuals are making money, usually one makes more than the other. Or even, this also takes into the context of who takes care of the children. Usually, one partner is more emotionally connected to the child than the other. Perhaps in more patriarchal society, that's the mother, but I think in any case, stay-at-home dads can also be, included in this case, right? What's the harm in this? A divorce settlement is never, that is not based on a prenuptial agreement, almost never ends up equitable. So sure, maybe it's not going to be 50-50 on our side, we concede that, but it is going to be based on the fundamental need of each partner. If you make less money than your partner, then you equally, that means that equitably you deserve a little bit more compensation because you probably won't have the safety net that your partner usually gives you in a marriage, right? So it means that most likely, one partner gets significantly more money in status quo. We don't like this coming from opening opposition. We want, at the very least, a fair metric and that allows for both partners to be equally safe. But lastly, when you make the prenuptial agreement, this is usually when you look forward to the marriage most, right? So it means that you probably put your partner on a pedestal-ish insofar as you don't really think they're going to go bad. So this is why it's so inherently important to mandate it. This is when you create a rational calculus for the individual to properly consider, even in the worst case scenario that it does end in a divorce, how can I protect myself to make sure that in that case, I am still safe. So the fundamental nature is that this provides a safety net. CO's POI to opening government, I think means that they're probably going to run with the case that the metric is therefore not fair and it's going to be one size fits all. Let's preempt this case. I think opening government don't properly mechanize how different the policy is going to be and how tailor-made it can be. I think the state also knows that not all relationships are 50-50. So I think it's probably safe to assume that the policy is also equally adaptable. Insofar as the state knows which parameter should be given for a partner to get more money. Is it feasible for the money distribution, the alimony to be 50-50? Is it feasible for the debt to be allocated? Is it feasible for one partner to be significantly allocated child support more, etc.? I think the state then therefore has the interest and also the ability to moderate this discussion between the partner to ensure that it is as fair as possible. But secondly, I think this is also adaptable insofar as if the marriage changes down the long run. For example, we understand maybe you get a promotion from your job. Maybe suddenly one partner gets laid off and then becomes the sole caregiver of the child, right? So I think it is also to some extent circumstantial and it can change, just like how contracts can be renewed. I think premarital agreements can also be renewed insofar that it is still legal and it is still fair. I think that's a fair metric. And of course, it's going to be moderated by a lawyer. So I don't think closing opposition can run with the push that, no, the policy is suddenly going to be one size fits all.
Second contribution, coming from why this eventually has to be mandatory to protect the most vulnerable actor. I think it's simple. The premise has to be a safety net, right? So sure, if you eventually end up in a long 60-year marriage that does not end up in divorce, alhamdulillah, nothing goes wrong, right? But eventually, this is very problematic when eventually the marriage goes into a divorce and you do not have a prenuptial agreement, and especially harmful when opening opposition posit the fact that partners can be gaslighting to one another, right? I think this is especially important. What I would have POI'd is if gaslighting exists in that extent that opening opposition posits, then it's all the more justified and necessary to run with mandating it, to have a supervised prenuptial agreement by a lawyer to prevent this power imbalance from actually causing harm to you directly when you eventually get to a divorce, right? So exactly, we have to contextually look at status quo. The divorces are becoming more and more common. So the state's responsibility should not be, no, you should not get divorced, but you should be able to adapt. So if a partner eventually decides to divorce, with one another, then they need to be able to provide a safety net for that partner to ensure that they are not disadvantaged. This is this household motion. The very important framing is why it is within the state's interest, right? So exactly, it is still within the state interest to protect the citizens, to provide that two-way discourse. Because exactly, in status quo, as opposition says, as OO says, the power imbalance within the marriage means that, either someone does not want to get prenuptial agreement because they want to keep the upper hand that they have, because they know that within, for example, in the case of a divorce settlement, they know that they can get more money, they know that they can put their partner in a disadvantaged position, they know that doing so would disincentivize the partner from actually divorcing them. This means that it actually protects the most vulnerable partner that is suffering from that imbalanced power dynamic. That is why it's so necessary to mandate this. But exactly, when, for example, if the partner's side that is disadvantaged does not want, because they don't want to think about the divorce, this means that this provides that necessary safety net. So no matter what, this equalizes the imbalance on a structural level, panel. So exactly, if you do not have a signing of a premarital agreement, then the most vulnerable actor is the one that the state needs to cater to. It is the one that suffers from this imbalanced power dynamic. It is the people who are suffering from domestic abuse within that marriage, but does not want to get a divorce because they are afraid of what society might tell, because they are afraid of, for example, losing all of their money, etc., right? So yes, to some extent, status quo has progressed insofar as people are getting prenuptial agreements, but that progress comes at the risk of the people who need prenuptial agreements the most. That is why the most vulnerable actor needs to be prioritized. So why is it going to be better? Exactly, because it's so powerful, because there is a legal basis to protect the one that is probably hurt most in the case of abuse, the one that is directly harmed. So because it's also decided initially, you make use of the bias you have towards your partner, that they put them on a pedestal. So the likelihood of them being fair in that creating a prenuptial agreement is far higher than when you're already fighting in a divorce settlement, after you're already angry at your partner after a huge fight, right? So exactly, it's going to be more fair. It's going to provide a better safety net. Very, very proud to propose. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm very short. Thank you. Yo. Cek 1 2, dikit lagi ke bawah, karena aku bakal nunduk. Oke, ya cukup. If I speak from this far, is it audible? Okay, so okay. All right, I'm just gonna start my speech in. I don't know what the position it should be. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Never make decisions when you're angry. Never make promises when you're happy. We believe that premarital agreement should remain a choice, and our choice only, not to enforce it to everyone. So what is CO going to bring in this debate? I think OO already talked extensively about how marriages become a transactional thing and the instability of couple dynamics, as well as other resolution options. We as CO will come into this debate proving that our side is the only one that can protect couples before, during, and after marriages occur. And this is something that will 100% win this debate. So I'm going to bring 2 arguments to my debate. First, on why it makes marriages less accessible and more toxic in the process. And secondly, I'm going to talk about how it creates an unfair divorce in marriages. So then, I'm just going to start into my first argument. Three layers in my first argument. First, on the impacts of this policy before marriages even happen. So, when things become mandatory, when it becomes a policy, it's not only something that gets a guideline from the government, but it also happens to have norms and societal standards from family, friends, or the general society itself. Eventually, a very prevalent expectation in society materializes, and people are expected to be able to provide for that minimum. And this directly cuts out certain groups from being able to marry, or at least dissuade them from being able to marry, because they might not have what it takes to get married with each other. And this is something harmful to do, because as the government, you do not want people to not marry. You want to foster healthy relationships and households. You want for them to procreate and actually form the new generation, and it's not something that you want to dissuade them from marriages. Second layer then, on how toxic relationships become worse on government side. Remember that these agreements involve promises that have to be fulfilled no matter what. And it's unlikely that any agreement is completely one-sided, right? Sure, it's not going to be 50-50, it might not be 50-50 per se, but there is always something that's going to be contributed from both sides. It is very likely that in a toxic or dysfunctional relationship, a lot of things cannot be fulfilled, either bad economy, you have a large debt, or maybe you don't have the right positions, investments, etc. If you're in a toxic relationship, you're less likely to be able to get out in the government's world, because you might not be able to fulfill your end of the agreement, so you can't get out. Because remember, this is something you have to be able to provide. Without the ability to provide that, you cannot get out. And the alternative to not doing that is something that's not exactly better. Things like getting in more debt or burdening others for help to bring other things in this equation that should involve you and your spouse only. The comparative is that in our side, in a toxic relationship, people can just go when they need to, because especially now in the current society, where the rise of awareness of gaslighting and toxic signs of toxicity are becoming prevalent, it's a matter of people actually already understanding that they are in a toxic relationship, and on our side, they can just go without having to worry about fulfilling agreements. Third layer then is that even in healthy relationship, it's actually better on our side of the house. This is a response to both government sides' argument about healthy relationships. A marriage, principally, should be a collective effort and a teamwork built on trust of both the husband and the wife. And this is something that should be prevalent in all marriages. It should be built on trust in each other, and it should be built on love and care for each other. On government side, couples are too focused on making sure their own agreement or their own part of the deal is fulfilled, or maybe even worse, they're only focused on making sure that the other's agreement is fulfilled. This becomes a relationship that's focused on distrust and built on making sure each other is fulfilling something that is contractually going to happen if they do fall out. And it's not something that the state wants for them to distrust each other and to prepare for the worst. Before I move on, I'll take any POIs, closing or opening. 3, 2.
The fact that trust is not something you can sign on a contract brings bigger risks. Why then on your world love is enough to avoid this kind of risks?
Love should be enough, because that should be the only reason you need to love someone, not economic condition, not actual what am I going to do if I break up? That should not be the factor in love. But even in a worst case scenario, that will exactly bring me into my second argument on how it creates an unfair divorce in marriages. 3 layers. First of all, we have to talk about the nature of relationships. When you are getting married, when you are planning marriages, you are at your happiest moments. You think you'll last forever and be happy ever after. This incentivizes people to make handicap agreements or disadvantages to one side and heavily benefits the other, something that might happen when you are seeing through rose-tinted glasses and you don't see the red flags because everything just looks red to you. At worst, it's something like intentional get-rich-quick or marry-rich-quick schemes, but at best, it's something that's a promise deluded by happiness. This looks like unfair wealth distributions, overly large alimony, split wealth and ownership, unfair custody rights, etc. This is something that is prone to happen when you are agreeing to something, when you think that nothing can stop you, when you are untouchable, when you think you'll last forever. However, but time is the biggest test of all. It will test your relationships to the thread's end. And that brings me to my second layer on breakup situations in the first place. In the long term, no one knows what would happen in a relationship or in a marriage. But when you do break up, whenever or if ever that happens, whatever happy promises might not reflect the feelings and the conditions you have now. And other than differences of feelings, other than just abuse, there are other things that might make you break up with someone else. So for example, an incapability to fulfill your needs or incapability and other things like that. But other than that, when you do break up, these conditions are not be fulfilled, and it might not reflect the actual condition that is fair for you at that time. Because remember, marriages can last 10, 20, 50 years, and that might not reflect what you feel back then, or what you have back then. For example, those who become poorer after making an agreement now have less capability to fulfill their agreements. Those who become richer, then you don't actually fulfill like what is deserved of your spouse if you do break up. And in cases of child custody and how the treatment of parents towards kids will vary, that becomes problematic as well, because it doesn't reflect what the condition of your relationship is in the beginning, and you might turn out to be even more abusive to your kids. Third layer then is the comparative. On our side, divorce feuds and conflicts will be, if they do exist and they're not on happy terms, they will be solved on a case-by-case basis. Things like couples couples law, and like Judge Judy analyzing each breakup and determining the right compensation people have when they do break up. This is a more beneficial solution because it manages to analyze the problems and also what each person deserves after that breakup has happened. Government side loses the ability to take a case-by-case basis on each divorce, because every case would be simply open and shut, because there is already a signed contract that says what they can do and what they cannot do. There is a contract on their side, so no matter what a jury sees or what happens or changes in the dynamic of the relationship, none of that matters because there's a contract fulfilling that. We cannot assume marriages will always be at the state where they start. They will always end differently than they started. And those reasons, we cannot risk this and out. Thank you.
Okay, am I audible? Okay. Okay. Okay, so my gender pronouns are he, him, and yeah, my PROI method is just, raise your hands if you want to POI me. And so, yeah, I'll start my speech in 3, 2. Okay, to start off, let's contextualize this debate. So what is a marriage? So marriage is something that is, quote unquote sacred, and it's basically officialized the bond between two people in the eyes of the law and even their official respective statuses. And so what is divorce? Divorce is something that cannot be predicted. Not all married couples who live happily ever after, married couples who love each other have that bond forever, and it is still prone for couples who love each other to, to easily divorce at some point. We cannot all generalize that, oh, all married couples will live happily ever after and their romance will still be there. And so, and so we say that no, marriages will not always be long-lasting, and divorce are most likely is going to happen. And so what is the impact of these divorces? So mostly divorces don't end well. That's why prenups exist. So yeah. And so why is it most likely it's not going to end well? Because basically there's this power imbalances and power, imbalances between the couples, like my first speaker has told you. And so yeah. And then let's talk about CO's case. So first off, they talk about how, how things became mandatory. And so, yeah, their entire case, they basically told you that, oh, marriages, that there's norms around it, that there's traditions that still exist that are against divorces. I think it has already been answered that, when there's, prenuptial mandatory before marriages exist, there's always going to be at least a discourse between what couples should do and get fairly, even when in worst case scenario, if they're getting a divorce, regardless of, if there's any, like norms or traditions that prohibit them to getting a divorce. So in any case, so, irrespective of traditions or, or if their one and only solution is to get a divorce, for example, their one and only solution, is to get a divorce, then there's at least some safety net and discussion between what the other, between, each couple should get after that, after the divorce settlement, and to be, have that same amount of fairness after the divorce has been settled. And okay, second of all, they told you about how how prenups that promises that prenups would give you, sometimes it couldn't be fulfilled, and has become something that is toxic because not all prenups that can be fulfilled. Here and here we tell you that that's why it's already within the interest of the government or the states to make prenups mandatory, because if one side fails to fulfill that prenup agreement, it's going to be of course it's going to be punishable by law. So if a person who has already been divorced, they didn't get that fulfillment of that prenup, they can easily sue the other partner for failing to fulfill that agreement. So that is why prenup should be made mandatory, because at least for both sides of the couple, they have at least some discussion on what they should do, what they should give to each other to make everything fair, and at least there's some safety net after the divorce has been settled. And second of all, their case has already been pretty much derivative from what OO brings you, that marriages are based on love, and we say that not all love lasts forever. Divorces are still prone to happen no matter what the reason is. So this burden has already been answered by us, and that's why we're winning over CO. And then let's talk about OO. So OO's rational calculus is basically saying that the real goal of marriage is to reach love and to start a family. I think their case only plays on the best case scenario, and we should know that like what I've said before many times, that worst case scenarios, marriages can be arranged or maybe even forced, like underage marriages like we can see in rural areas when modern way of thinking does not apply. So. And so with all that, we do know that not all married couples, they live happily ever after. Not everyone is going to be loving to each other. There's at least some things that's going to happen. So yeah, we cannot generalize that. So couples are prone to make mistakes. Maybe they're forced or rushed to get their hands in marriage. So we cannot assume all marriages are going to have the same basis, which is on love. And that's why. So yeah, that's why we as CG are telling you that prenup should be made mandatory, because it's actually going to give you more benefit in case you're getting a divorce, regardless of what happens. So why prenups are. And so the biggest question that they have not answered is why prenups are bad, why mandating prenups is still bad, and they haven't answered it, and where their entire reasoning is, it's surrounding, like what he says and what she says. And so when OG has clearly said that no, it's not the case, it's actually, no, marriages are not always couples gaslighting with each other, like what OO has described to you in their entire speeches. So their entire case still plays on these, these psychological effects. So we believe with fairness or alimony and child support from mandating prenups, it's going to be, it's going to be like, and so we're playing from their case here is, they brought up something like, if what if this child was abused and the child was traumatized. So by actually using that child support money that you're getting from that prenup, parents can actually, use that money to put their child into therapy, and so further proves prenups brings more actual benefits. And so we already answered their burden of abuse. So current status quo, that there's already protection against domestic violence, and here we tell you that it's already within the interest of the government state. With the addition of mandatory prenups, couple can easily get settled when they're divorced, and fairly and easily. And so we've also answered their heavy burden, which is the power of imbalance between the divorced couple. That's the most likely to happen. And so I think we can easily win from against the OO, because we brought a much more clearer contextualization and factors and unfairness of the power imbalances. And so lastly, let's talk about OG. So why we're better than OG, and why our new contribution brought up by my first speaker is better, and why we win against OG. So we should know that divorces are most likely to happen, right? So they haven't told you why prenup should be made mandatory, because marriages, you should know that marriages is not something simple, and it's not, and I think it's not the real urgency here, that their case was not the real urgency here. So here's why. So, assuming even if all parties love each other, know each other very well, but divorces are inevitable, couples who still love each other can easily get a divorce regardless. So the problem lies within the tendency of unfair divorce settlements. So without the prenup, partner A goes bankrupt, partner B goes rich, and with partner A's money. So that's why I think us as CG, we brought up the most tangible impact, which is the unfairness of divorce settlement. So that's why prenup should be made mandatory. Here's why. One, it creates further discussion between the couples, fairer and easier, and distribution of assets can be, easily reached, and child support and all that, etc. And so lastly, it creates a, safety net for each individual who's getting the divorce. And so it's already within the state of interest, state interest of, to make that prenups to be made mandatory. And so that's all from me, and proud to oppose. Thank you.
tinggi banget. Tes, ya. Oh iya. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The moment the motion says that this is mandatory, it makes you think, right? To what extent does this policy complies, making it doesn't happen in the status quo right now, if it's really, really that beneficial, panels? So given that this is going to be the policy that is going to be implied, the burden inside of this debate should be why this choice is going to be beneficial, right? Why the existence of choice in this debate is going to be benefit, and to what extent is status quo is not enough. Exactly what opening opposition is going, what closing opposition has already told you. We're going to be giving you the clear characterization why the choice inside of our case is really, really important. So the thing about choice is that the opening opposition is missing this analysis of choice. CG and OG acts as if this is going to, this prenuptial agreement is not going to be implied as if that there is no choice in our side of the house, right? This is exactly why it's really important in this debate. So the way that I'm going to structure my speech is upon the really big clash of marriages and sustainabilities of the family in the future, right? But there are under 2 layers. Firstly, we're going to be talking about like the biggest elephant in this room, which is like exit mechanism and protection towards victims of abuse inside of a relationship. Secondly, we're going to talk about like protection even after the divorce is going to happen. Things like what happens to the custody of the kids, for example, these kinds of analysis. Firstly, let's talk about like exit mechanism and protection, right? Prenuptial agreement are going to be really rigid at first. Sure, it's going to be a form of protection, but this is mostly going to look like a protection of economy. Exactly, why not every relationships now have prenuptial agreements? Only really, really rich one have prenuptial agreements, right? So the policy is really one size fits. If the policy is really not a one size fits all as what CG said, then why not everyone have it, right? The fact that not everyone have it means that there is a certain extent that there are going to be trade-offs when you are implementing this policy. What does this look like? Second thing, this protection of economy is going to be most likely dominant from the breadwinners, for example. Most likely there are going to be present imbalances inside of this kind of agreement at the very first place. The way that the imbalances look like is going to look like a really prominent in a really normal marriage from a middle income family, for example. When people sign up from this prenuptial agreement, they will going to lose so much, for example, inside of their agreements. They are going to have to pay their significant other after the marriage is going to cost them significantly, making them lose so much. So the fact that this trade-off of losing so much of your money, this is exactly why normal marriages doesn't opt in for the prenuptial agreement at the very first place. So what does this imply, right? 3. The third analysis means that for people that are currently in a toxic relationship, that are inside of these normal marriages, they cannot get out. Why? Firstly, they will lose so much in this. They will lose so much when they will try to opt out, because at the end of the day, you have to fulfill the burden. You have to fulfill the burden of your initial prenuptial agreement. You thought at the first that you can fulfill it, but now you're in a toxic relationship. Now you cannot fulfill it. So you want to conserve this marriage because you cannot pay this threshold of money you agreed upon at the beginning of your marriage, right? That's the first one. Secondly, after they lose so much, the problem actually have attraction towards the binding, the inherent binding of this policy at the very first place. The fact that they cannot change it, the fact that this is very, very stagnant towards their 20 years marriages, for example. This becomes really, really significant. Because why? Because relationships are dynamic, right? I think we agree this a bit, right? So the fact that your economic conditions are going to be very fluctuative upon times, this is exactly why normal marriages are not opting in, because they know that it's going to be binding, they know that they might not be stable in the next 20 years, and they know that maybe they cannot fulfill the burden of the alimonies or whatnot at the very first place.
Point,
so,
CG.
No, thank you. So let's try to weight this, right? So let's try to weight this exit mechanism and protection in this debate towards the comparison of the existence of choice versus non-existence of choice. Without choice, people have to opt in into this breadwinner analysis that I have already told you. The normal marriages will lose so much that they know that at the end of the day, what is most likely to happen is that people are going, this specific actor inside of a relationship have to obey to the breadwinner, they have to lose so much and whatnot, so the asymmetric of the amount of money is going to be likely, right? But with choice of whether you want prenuptial agreements or not, what is going to be beneficial in our side of the house is that you're going to do it if you think that it's fair for you to do it. If you think that like your relationship are going to last, then it's okay for you to do it, right? If you think that you're currently unstable, for example, then don't do it. This kind of benefit of choice, when people actually discuss with their partners together, are exactly why the benefit is really exclusive and important in our side of the house, right? We have already told
Point,
you
CG.
why CO doesn't have this conclusion at all. Yes.
I think we have already explained how that discussion can inherently be biased and subjective towards people who suffer from an imbalanced power dynamic. And I don't think you've been able to sufficiently respond, and that is fatal for your case because we prove that it's going to be detrimental for the individual.
But the comparison is really clear, right? When you don't have this kind of choices, then you have to justify at all means that this conclusion, that prenuptial have to be done at the very first place. So we don't want that force. We don't want that force of discussion. We want a flexibility. We want this relationship to have like a third party opinion. For example, this benefit of choice realize in us. CO doesn't have this conclusion, and CG breaks this deadlock coming from the opening debates, right? About like exit mechanism and protection towards abuse. Secondly, what about like protection even after the divorce happens? This looks like for the kids, for example. We think like child protection, things like courts, we think like custody that are already given by courts and the laws are exactly sufficient in our side of the house. This kind of thing is inexclusive, like with or without prenuptial agreement, it's going to be happening in our side of the house. So child supports are going to be there. So we think like this second clash is this second clash is not as significant as the first one. We think that the existing status quo versus the proposal that we're making here doesn't have a significant difference, right? So what does this imply? What does my conclusion here? CG comes into this debate by trying to give you a really clear picturization of how this choice really matters at the very first place. We have already told you why it's really hard for you to get out from a toxic relationship. We break this deadlock, never been prouder to propose.